Okay, I'm going to come in from a slightly different angle, which may be more specific to South Africa's situation. But the suggestion I have been lobbying for a bit here is to use a technology called voice stress analysis on the key people in the state who has the power, to have the power to procure. And essentially what is we have a body called a Special Investigating Unit in South Africa. They've been using this technology for a very long time. It's called voice stress analysis or voice layered analysis in some cases. But essentially my proposal is that if you put the key people in the procurement process in the state in a professional body that has the power to discipline them if they do something wrong. For example, our lawyers at the moment already, the private sector bar can disbar lawyers in the state from practicing further. So I think if one can look at something like that, but my key proposal really is to use the voice stress analysis technology on the top 3 layers of the procurement process in the state. So that's, in our case, the accounting officer, the chief financial officer, the head of procurement. And I think if one can set up a proper process that prevents them from doing the wrong thing in the first place, partly because they are scared that they will be caught, because they will be caught, but also in combination with a much better whistleblower program than most countries have. So I think one needs, my suggestion for South Africa is that we use some retired constitutional court judges to head a whistleblower program, and you give them a lot of power to force law enforcement to go and investigate the cases that gets reported to them under their supervision, for instance. So I think if you can get a combination of securing the integrity of the key people in the supply chain management process, plus a proper whistleblower program, I think we can solve or prevent most of corruption from actually happening in the first place. And why I think that is important is that we all know to prosecute corruption cases is long, complicated, very resource intensive. And so I think the extent to which one can put in those processes in place, and as I said, we've used it in South Africa quite a long time in the Special Investigating Unit. There's been no constitutional or legal challenges to this process at the Special Investigating Unit. So in short, I'm just saying, prosecuting corruption cases or any economic crime cases is long, complicated, and difficult. To some degree, I think we need to give a lot more attention to how we secure the integrity of the people in the supply chain management process. And that will take a huge amount of pressure off law enforcement in terms of the number of cases they end up having to deal with. So fairly short and sweet, but that is my pearls of wisdom for the day.
Thanks, Willie. So, I mean, you've jumped the gun on a number of topics, which I think we want to unpack, and I think you've raised a lot of interesting points. Before we get back to non-trial resolutions, to pick up on your suggestion of in the supply chain having a quasi, like the legal profession has a bar. Do I understand your proposal correctly that we need to set up an actual professional body in the supply chain and have that body have the power to discipline members? There needs to be some sort of test, if you like, board exams, something similar, to ensure that those who are involved in supply chains are up to scratch.
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages in South Africa is that our lawyers basically are part of the same bar as the private sector. So the issue of disciplining people is not only in the hands of the state, which may be captured as it has been in South Africa in the past, so that you have an independent body essentially that can say this person is not fit for the job. They're not going to be allowed to work, at least in the state, but I would argue in the private sector as well in this area. Effective whistleblowing mechanism. Because at the moment, the reality is you are actually supposed to whistleblow to your boss, who's usually the one who's done the wrong thing. So my suggestion is we have a very credible group of people in South Africa who are retired constitutional court judges. They get paid for life, even though they're not active judges anymore. So my suggestion is that we should set up a whistleblower protection body headed by judges or retired judges from the Constitutional Court, and you give them some real powers that, for example, they can force law enforcement or instruct law enforcement to investigate the case under their supervision. But I do think that, the Constitutional Court judges are really the only credible institution that we have left in our country. And I think that they really can be utilized to set up a very, very good whistleblowing process, as long as one is willing to give them the powers. They are also, anyway, paid for life while they are alive. So the costs of such a mechanism will not be huge. But the current whistleblowing system is you're supposed to report to your boss, who's usually the one who's instructed the wrong things to happen. So I do think whistleblowing is an issue where we do need some urgent action to be taken. I think we have a moment of opportunity now when there's a lot of sort of public interest and so on about this issue, and I think that we really should urge for some urgent action to be taken to set up a proper whistleblowing mechanism, which we just don't have at the moment.
Thank you.
Just a couple of points. Now, I think the one issue is that there is not the issue of a proper whistleblower mechanism. I think that is vital. I think there were many people in the state who wanted to say something, but they really didn't trust the mechanisms that there are in the state to report. So, I think the idea of a proper mechanism headed by Constitutional Court judges, as I said, to deal with whistleblowers, for me, is a critically important issue. But I wanted to just raise one last issue just for everybody's attention. But I think one of the big challenges in state capture was that when we wrote the Constitution, we were somewhat starry-eyed. And the Constitution just says the president appoints every important person in law enforcement. No process is described. When we get a bad president, essentially becomes incredibly easy to capture the whole of law enforcement and to appoint bad people. So I think that can partly be dealt with the integrity testing process, but I do think that's something that we need to think about very seriously. I think with recent appointments, at least there's been some kind of process in the NPA to appoint people, but it's purely voluntary. There's no legal obligation to check people out properly and so on before they are appointed to very key and very important positions in law enforcement.